The night Marcus Reyes put a bullet in Tommy Chen's skull, 16-year-old Leo Vargas was crouched behind a dumpster on Caldwell Street, 5 feet away, his phone pressed against the corrugated metal and his thumb already pressing record. He hadn't meant to be there. Nobody with any sense was on Caldwell after dark, not with the Vipers running the whole eastern corridor of Redfield City. But Leo's shortcut home from the library had turned into the worst decision of his life the moment he rounded the corner and found 3 men in black, serpent tattoos coiling up their necks, standing in a half-circle around a terrified delivery driver named Tommy Chun. Marcus Reyes stood at the center. The Snake, they called him. He wore a charcoal blazer over a collarless shirt, shoes clean despite the puddles, holding a glass of ice water like he was at a business dinner instead of a wet alleyway behind a noodle shop. That was what made Marcus truly terrifying. He never raged. He never raised his voice. He just spoke in that low, final tone, the voice of a man who had already decided, days ago, what was going to happen, and who was simply walking through the formalities now. 30 days, Tommy, Marcus said. I gave you 30 days because I respect your mother. Marcus, please, man, I got kids, Your children need a father who honors his word. Marcus handed his glass to the man on his left without looking at him. You dishonored your word. I'll get the money, I swear on mine. A single, suppressed crack split the silence. Then nothing. Leo's hand was shaking so badly, he nearly dropped the phone. He pressed his spine flat against the dumpster, squeezed his eyes shut, praying that the pounding of his heart wasn't as loud outside his chest as it was inside. It was the man on the far right who turned first. A thick-necked bruiser with a viper inked across his jaw, scanning the alley the way a dog scans a yard it doesn't trust. His eyes found Leo's in the gap between the dumpster and the wall. 1 beat of silence. 2. Hey. And Leo ran. He didn't think. Didn't plan. His legs just went, sneakers slapping the wet pavement as he exploded out of the alley and into the street, backpack bouncing. The yell of, "Get him!" tearing through the night behind him like a second gunshot. He had maybe a 30-foot head start. That was all that stood between him and a shallow grave on the east side. He ran like his life depended on it. Because it absolutely did. Leo had been on the track team once. Freshman year, before his mom got sick and he took on 2 part-time jobs to help with the bills and had to drop every extracurricular that wasn't essential survival. He wasn't fast enough to be a star, but he'd always been stubborn, the kind of runner who didn't have a great stride but just refused to stop. That stubbornness might be the only reason he was still alive. He cleared a chain-link fence on Dumont Avenue without slowing, felt the top bar rake across his palm, didn't care. Behind him, boots thundered on pavement. 2 of them, maybe 3. He could hear them calling into phones, coordinating, cutting off exits. The Vipers knew this neighborhood better than he did. They owned it. Every corner, every shortcut, every shadow. Think, Leo. Think. He ducked left down an alley behind a laundromat, then right, then vaulted a low wall into a parking lot, weaving between cars. His lungs were burning. His cheap canvas sneakers were soaked through. He had his phone in his hand, the phone with the video, and he knew that as long as he held it, they would never stop chasing him. He came around the corner of Bridger Street and nearly ran headfirst into a parked semi, catching the bumper with both hands and swinging sideways. He pressed himself into the narrow gap between the truck and the building wall, gulping air, listening. Footsteps, coming closer. He looked frantically up the street. Closed storefronts, a shuttered gas station, a pawn shop with iron bars on the windows. And then, at the far end of the block, something he'd always subconsciously avoided. A squat, windowless building set behind a chain-link perimeter, painted flat black, with a single steel door under a flickering fluorescent light. Motorcycles, dozens of them, lined up in rows so perfect they looked like a military parade. Chrome glinting in the streetlight. Big, brutal machines with engines that probably shook the whole block when they turned over. Above the steel door, painted in red letters so faded they were almost brown, Iron Road MC, Redfield Chapter. Leo knew who they were. Everybody did. The Hells Angels affiliate that ran the western end of Redfield. The ones with the reputations that made police cars drive a little faster past their clubhouse and made grown men cross the street. He'd heard the stories. They were dangerous men who lived by their own laws and answered to nobody. The footsteps were maybe 20 yards behind him now. Leo Vargas had exactly 1 second to make a decision. He ran for the steel door. He hit it with his shoulder, half expecting it to be locked, fully prepared to bounce off it and face whatever was coming. But the door swung inward with a bang, and Leo tumbled through it into a wall of warm air, cigarette smoke, old leather, and the smell of engine oil so thick it was almost a flavor. The room went quiet. It was a large space with exposed brick walls and low industrial lights. A bar running the length of the far wall, a pool table, a dartboard, and maybe 20 men in black leather vests, all of whom had turned to look at the 16-year-old kid who had just fallen through their door like a package dropped from a great height. Leo scrambled to his feet. His knees were bleeding. His backpack was half torn off his shoulder. He held his phone up in one shaking hand like a talisman. "Please," he managed, chest heaving. "Please, there's." The door opened again behind him. The two vipers who had been chasing him stepped through, chests heaving. The bigger one, the one with the serpent jaw tattoo, took in the room with a slow, contemptuous sweep, pulled his jacket back to show the gun on his hip, and said loudly, "Boy doesn't belong to you. Step aside, and we take him. Nobody has a problem tonight." The silence in the room changed. It went from surprise to dangerous in about half a second. From the back of the room, a bar stool scraped against the concrete floor. A man stood up. Leo's first impression was that he was looking at a wall. Not a large man, a geological feature. 6'2" and built like someone had stacked 250 pounds of muscle, scar tissue, and certainty onto a frame that seemed designed specifically to block doorways and end arguments. He was maybe 55, with a silver beard that reached his chest, forearms covered in tattoos from wrist to elbow, wearing a leather vest with so many patches it was almost impossible to see the black beneath them. The patch over his heart said one word: President. Everyone who knew anything about the Iron Road MC knew that patch, knew the man who wore it, Bear. He walked from the bar to the center of the room in total silence, each step measured and unhurried, like a man who had never needed to rush in his life because the world adjusted its pace to his. He stopped 10 feet from the vipers and folded his arms across his enormous chest. He didn't say anything. He just looked at them. The viper with the jaw tattoo cleared his throat. That kid saw something he wasn't supposed to see. "This doesn't concern you. It's viper business." Bear's gaze moved, just for a moment, to Leo. It was a quick, assessing look, the kind a man uses to take inventory. Leo's bleeding knees, the torn backpack, the phone held up in his shaking hand, the way his jaw was set despite the fear in his eyes. Then Bear looked back at the vipers. "Son," Bear said, and his voice was extraordinary, a low bass rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the floor. "You just walked into my house, put a gun on display in front of my men, and told me how to run my business. We just want the boy, and I want 6 inches more leg room on my bike." Bear unfolded his arms. "We don't always get what we want." The second viper, smaller, wiry, angrier, stepped forward. "Marcus Reyes will hear about this. You have any idea what hill?" "Tell Marcus," Bear said pleasantly, "that he's welcome to come discuss it in person. My door is always open." He paused. "But the next time your boys walk through it uninvited, they will leave through the wall." From behind Bear, the men of the Iron Road MC began to stand. Not rushed, not theatrical. Just one by one rising to their feet with the casual, unhurried confidence of men who had been in worse situations than this and were mildly disappointed the evening hadn't been more interesting. Someone reached under the bar and produced a baseball bat, which he rested on his shoulder with the air of a man considering a project he wasn't sure was worth his time. Another man had a shotgun laid across the bar top, not pointed at anyone, just present, the way a fact is present. The atmosphere in the room, which had been merely dangerous, became something else entirely. Something final. The viper with the jaw tattoo looked around. Did the math. Looked back at Bear. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Bear agreed. "It isn't. But you are. Get out." They went. The steel door clanged shut. Leo let out a breath that felt like it had been stored in his body for 3 years. His legs gave, and he sat down hard on the concrete floor, unable to help it. His hands were still shaking. Bear crouched in front of him. At this proximity, the man was even more overwhelming. The deep lines in his face, the silver threading through his beard, the eyes that were dark and surprisingly steady, not unkind. "What's on the phone?" Bear asked. "Marcus Reyes. Killing someone. I recorded it. I didn't mean to be there. I was just cutting through. Leo's voice was doing something he didn't like, thinning and climbing toward a register he had outgrown. He stopped, took a breath, steadied himself. "I was taking a shortcut. I turned a corner, and there was a man, and Marcus he couldn't finish that sentence." Bear held out his hand. Leo looked at the enormous, scarred hand. looked at Bear's face. He handed over the phone. Bear watched the video. His expression didn't change. It had probably never changed much in 50 years, but something in his jaw tightened. He watched it twice. Then he handed the phone back to Leo. "You kept running," Bear said. "You could have dropped it." "It's the only evidence," Leo said. "If I dropped it, they get away with it." Bear studied him for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes, not warmth exactly, but recognition. The look a man gives something that surprises him. "What's your name, kid?" "Leo. Leo Vargas." "How old are you, Leo?" 16. A man behind Bear made a sound that might have been a laugh. Bear didn't turn around. "You got somewhere to go?" Bear asked. Leo thought about his apartment. His mom, working a double shift at the hospital tonight. The address that Marcus Reyes's men already knew, because the Vipers knew every address on the east side. "No," Leo said. "Not tonight." Bear stood. He was quiet for a moment, looking down at Leo with that unreadable expression. Then he turned to the room. "Prospect," he called out. Several men looked over. "Not you idiots," Bear said. "The new one." He looked back at Leo. You're the Clubhouse's prospect as of now. That means you're under the protection of the Iron Road MC. Anybody touches you, they're touching us." He said this the way other people might say it looks like rain, matter-of-factly, without particular emphasis, which somehow made it more absolute than if he'd shouted it. He turned and walked back to the bar. Leo sat on the floor of the Iron Road MC Clubhouse and tried to process what had just happened. A man with forearms like ham hocks dropped a paper towel in his lap. "For the knees," he said. He was maybe 30, with a dark beard trimmed close and the build of someone who spent his free time being dangerous. His vest patch read, "SGT at ARMS." "Jax." He looked at Leo the way you look at a stray cat that has wandered onto your property, with a mixture of inconvenience and reluctant acknowledgement. "You hungry?" Jax asked. Leo blinked. "What? Hungry? Food. You want some?" Yeah, I think so." Jax jerked his head toward the bar. "Then get up. Prospects don't sit on the floor." Leo got up. The first rule of being a prospect, Leo learned, was that you had no rules. What he meant by this was that there was no handbook, no orientation, no list of expectations provided up front. You figured it out by watching, by working, by making mistakes, and by understanding that the men around you had zero obligation to explain themselves, and that your continued presence was a privilege extended on a day-to-day basis. The second rule, the one nobody stated aloud but that was enforced with startling consistency, was homework first. Leo discovered this on his second morning at the Clubhouse. He had been given a cot in the back storage room, which smelled of gasoline and old cardboard but was warm and dry and had a lock on the door, which felt like extraordinary luxury under the circumstances. He had slept for 12 hours straight from sheer nervous exhaustion, showered in the Clubhouse bathroom, and come out to find the main room occupied by an early meeting he was clearly not invited to. He had pulled out his calculus textbook at the bar, the long bar, which doubled as a desk apparently, since 3 other men were eating breakfast at it, and was working through derivatives when Bear materialized behind him. Leo braced himself. Bear looked at the textbook, looked at the half-work problem, looked at Leo. "What class?" he said. "Calculus." "AP." Bear made a sound of mild approval. He poured himself a coffee, sat down 2 stools over, and opened a newspaper, an actual print newspaper, which Leo found inexplicably charming, and said nothing more. But when Leo tried to put the textbook away an hour later to go help in the garage, Bear said, without looking up, "Finish the chapter." Leo finished the chapter. This became law. Homework, then chores. Any man in the Clubhouse who caught Leo doing physical tasks while schoolwork remained incomplete would redirect him to the bar with his books. Jax once made him put down a wrench mid-bolt and go finish an English essay. Bear read the essay afterward. He didn't ask to. Leo just mentioned it had been graded and made a single comment. "Good vocabulary. Work on your topic sentences." Nobody talked about this rule. Nobody explained it or justified it. It simply was. The way the protocol for greeting other MC members simply was, or the way you never asked about another man's business unless invited to. Leo's actual duties as prospect were comprehensive and unglamorous. He swept floors. He cleaned bathrooms. He fetched parts from the supply house on Meridian Avenue. He polished the row of motorcycles outside with a chamois cloth every morning until each one gleamed like a mirror, and he did this slowly enough to feel the machines, the weight and gravity of them, the quality of the chrome and the leather, the way each bike seemed to have a distinct personality expressed in how it had been customized. He learned, without being formally taught. which bike belonged to which man, and that you never touched another man's bike, and that keeping your work spotless was how you demonstrated respect you hadn't yet earned through words. In between, he watched. The Iron Road MC was not what Leo had imagined. He had expected chaos, all bluster and aggression and arbitrary menace. What he found instead was something closer to a monastery. There were rules everywhere, just none of them written down. There was a hierarchy, enforced not through threats, but through the weight of reputation and character. Men deferred to Bear not because they feared him, though some did, but because Bear had been doing this for 30 years and had never once made a decision that put his men second, and that record spoke louder than any threat. There were also, genuinely, good men here. There was Tiny, who was 6'4" and spent his evenings video calling his 12-year-old daughter and helping her with spelling homework through the camera, holding the phone very carefully in his enormous hands. There was Ramos, 50, who had done 2 tours overseas and now organized a quarterly toy drive for the Children's Hospital on the north side of Redfield. There was Shepard, who Leo once walked in on reading the Iliad at the bar at 11 in the morning and who made no apology for it. And there was Jax. Jax was the sergeant-at-arms, which meant he was, among other things, the enforcer of internal discipline and the man responsible for the physical security of the clubhouse and its members. He was also the most difficult man Leo had ever met, and Leo had met his high school vice principal, who had made an entire career of being difficult. Jax's philosophy toward Leo was simple. The kid needed to be useful, or he was a liability. Sentiment didn't factor in. He assigned Leo the hardest physical tasks, corrected him without softening the correction, and watched him with the quiet intensity of a man who was perpetually taking notes. The training started on Leo's 4th day, not a fight. Leo clarified that quickly when Jax materialized in the storage room at 6 in the morning and told him to be in the back parking lot in 10 minutes. Basic self-defense, Jax said. Every morning. You move around the city for us. You need to know how to get out of a grab. I'm not really a fighter, Leo said. Nobody is, before they learn. Jax started to leave, then paused. Bring comfortable shoes. It was not glamorous. It was repetitive and physical, and Leo spent the first week feeling like a crash test dummy, but Jax taught cleanly and without contempt. He had the patience of a man who understood that skill was built in layers, and that you cannot skip the bottom layers just because the top ones were more interesting. He taught Leo how to break a wrist grab, how to fall correctly, how to create distance, how to move. You're small. Jax said on the 5th morning, that's not a disadvantage. Small men have faster feet and lower centers of gravity. Stop trying to fight big. Fight quick. Leo fought quick. By the end of the 2nd week, he had stopped landing on the ground quite so often. What Bear and Jax and none of the men knew, because Leo hadn't found a natural opening to explain it, was that the part of Leo that was most useful in the coming storm wasn't his legs or his fists. It was the drones. Leo had been building and modifying unmanned aerial vehicles since he was 12, cobbling them together from discarded electronics, modifying control software, soldering circuit boards at the kitchen table while his mother slept between shifts. He had 3 of them currently in his backpack, 2 small reconnaissance models and 1 mid-sized unit with a modified camera rig and an extended signal range that he had built from scratch over 18 months. He had been flying them in the empty lots near his apartment, testing range limits, because he had a project in mind for his senior year, a community surveillance system that local residents could use to document environmental violations in their neighborhood. The drones were, for now, just sitting in his bag. His moment hadn't come yet. While Leo was learning to fall without breaking his wrists in the Iron Road's back parking lot, 3 miles away in a glass and brick building that used to be a textile factory, Marcus Reyes was having a different kind of meeting. Officer Davis arrived at Marcus's private office at 11 in the evening, as he always did when the situation required deniability, late enough that the building's legitimate staff were gone, early enough that the streets were still semi-active and his car wouldn't be noted. Davis was 45, heavy-set, with the carefully neutral expression of a man who had spent 2 decades performing civic virtue and 2 decades simultaneously selling it. He sat across from Marcus and accepted the glass of water he was offered, because he never accepted alcohol on the job, even this job. The Angels won't give up the boy, Marcus said, not as a complaint, as a fact to be solved. The Angels are the problem, Davis said. Have been for a while. We handle the boy, and we handle the Angels in one move. Marcus was quiet, which meant he was interested. They have a charity ride scheduled. Friday night, 14 miles through the East Quarter, ending at the community center on Harker. Davis set a folded paper on the desk. A shipment of unregistered weapons and product, planted along the route the night before, combined with an anonymous tip to the narcotics unit and a tactical response team I can put in position, and the Iron Road MC becomes a memory. And if the weapons can't be traced back to them, I'll trace them. Davis picked up his glass. That's what I do. Marcus looked at the folded paper for a long moment. The boy's evidence still exists, he said. The boy will be in custody by Saturday morning, Davis said. We can ensure his phone doesn't survive processing. A slow smile crossed Marcus Reyes's face. Not warm, not even particularly human. Friday night, he said. Davis nodded. Friday night. Leo had been doing supply runs for the clubhouse since his third day. Fetch parts, pick up packages, run messages. It was part of the prospect role, and he had taken to it without complaint. He knew the routes well now, knew which blocks were safe, knew when to move quickly and when to blend in. On Thursday afternoon, Bear handed him a list and a folded bill. Hardware store on Meridian. Ramos needs half-inch hex bolts, a set of locking pliers, and if they have them, a spool of 16-gauge wire. Bear looked at him steadily. Take the long route. Don't cut through the East Quarter. Understood. He took his drone. Not for any planned purpose. He had gotten into the habit of carrying the small reconnaissance unit, the one he called Ghost, tucked into the side pocket of his backpack. Ghost weighed less than 8 ounces, had a 40-minute flight time, a 50-meter range, and a camera stabilized well enough to read text at 15 meters of altitude. He had been flying it most evenings from the roof of the clubhouse, just to decompress, watching the city from above. He was on his way back from Meridian, hardware and back, taking the scenic route east toward the Dockside Park open lot he used as a landing zone. Open sky, low foot traffic, no power lines, when he heard the voices. He almost missed them. They were under the Caldwell Avenue overpass, half sheltered by the concrete pillars, 2 men sitting in a black sedan with the engine off and both windows down, speaking in the kind of low, business-level register people used when they thought they were alone. Leo stopped. He knew one of those voices. He had heard it once before, in a glass and brick building on the far side of town, in a story he hadn't been meant to hear. Davis. Leo pressed himself against the overpass support pillar and eased Ghost out of his bag. Powered the unit up in silent mode, no startup chime, which he had long since disabled, and held it in both hands while the rotors spun up to operational speed, then released it at arm's length, angling it up and over the concrete above his head until it cleared the edge and hovered in the open air 20 feet above the sedan. He angled the camera down. Both men were clearly visible through the open windows. Davis, badge glinting on his belt, unmarked plainclothes jacket, and a man Leo recognized as one of Marcus's lieutenants, a wiry man named Cato who handled Viper logistics. Leo edged the volume on his earpiece up. Ghost's microphone array wasn't designed for this distance, but in the still air under the overpass, the audio was passable. Route confirmation. The full ride goes through Meridian, then south on Caldwell, then loops west on Harbor before the finish on Harker. Total run is about 40 minutes of road time from start to finish. The cache at the halfway point, Davis said, and Leo heard the scratch of paper. This position here, between the old garage and the storm drain on the south side of Caldwell, is that accessible before Friday? Marcus had his people in there this morning. Already placed. Cato's voice was flat. 6 kilos of product and 4 unregistered handguns. Clean of any Viper prints. Good. The tip goes in at 9:45, tactical response gets there at 10. 15 minutes into the ride, they'll be right on top of it. Davis folded the paper. The team I've lined up doesn't ask questions. They will find what they're told to find. And if any of the angels resist, they won't have the chance. A long silence. Marcus wants confirmation. The whole chapter goes down. No partial. The whole chapter, Davis said firmly. Every man with an Iron Road patch gets processed. That place gets padlocked and stripped. It'll be the cleanest operation in the department's history. He almost sounded proud of it. Friday, 10 p.m. It's done. Leo held the drone steady through the roaring in his ears. 6 kilos. For guns. Planted. A tactical strike time to the charity ride. An inside officer coordinating the frame. If this went through as planned, if the Iron Road MC went out on that ride tomorrow night with no warning, Bear, Jax, Ramos, Tiny, Shepard, all of them would be processed on fabricated evidence. The clubhouse would be seized. 30 years of Bear's life, dismantled in an evening by a man with a badge and a vendetta. And once they were in custody, Leo would be next. Isolated, unprotected, the only witness to Marcus Reyes's crime. His phone, and the evidence on it, would disappear in processing, exactly as Davis had said. He brought Ghost down slowly, hands steady despite everything. He had less than 30 hours. He walked back to the clubhouse at a controlled pace. No running, nothing to attract attention, the hardware in the bag and his expression completely neutral, and went directly to the storage room to think. He sat on the cot for 10 minutes, working the problem the same way he worked calculus problems, stripping it back to its components. He needed to warn Bear. He needed to document what Davis and Cato had said. Ghost's audio wasn't clean enough, but the visual footage of the meeting was clear. He needed the planted evidence removed or discredited before Friday's ride. And he needed, somehow, to ensure that Marcus and Davis didn't walk away from this. He pulled his tablet from his bag and began to write. When he heard Bear's knock, Bear knocked differently from everyone else, a single deliberate double tap. He said, "Come in," and turned the tablet around. Bear read the screen. His face didn't change. He read it again. "This the same voice you heard 2 weeks ago?" Bear asked. "Davis, yes. I'd recognize his voice anywhere. And Ghost got the footage. I can pull a clear still of both their faces. The cache on Caldwell. South side, between the old garage and the storm drain. I can locate it precisely if I do a low-altitude pass tomorrow morning." Bear was quiet for a very long time. The kind of quiet that'd wait. "We could cancel the ride," Leo said. "We cancel the ride, they reroute. Try again another way." Bear's voice was even. "And Marcus knows we know. We lose the advantage." He looked at the tablet again. "The Caldwell cache. You can find it exactly." "Yes." "And Ghost footage of Davis and the other man. It's usable?" "Visually, yes. Audio is partial, but followable if you know what's being discussed. I can enhance it, given time." Bear stood. He was quiet another long moment, thinking in that deep, oceanic way he had. Not the surface thinking of a man solving a puzzle, but the foundation-level consideration of a man who understood that every decision carries weight and consequence. "I'm going to speak to the chapter," he said. "You've done well, Leo." He said it simply, without elaboration, the way he said everything. But coming from Bear, it landed with the force of a much longer speech. Leo nodded. What he didn't say, what he was still working through in the back of his mind as Bear left, was the part of the plan he hadn't shared yet. The part that couldn't involve Bear, because it required one person moving fast and small and invisible through a situation that would turn dangerous the moment it was detected. The planted evidence wasn't just a warning that needed to be delivered. It needed to be dismantled. And that was a job for a 16-year-old with 3 drones, a modded electronic signal jammer he had built for a science fair project, and exactly nothing to lose. Friday arrived the way bad days always do, blue-skied and ordinary, giving nothing away. Leo had slept 3 hours. He had spent the rest of the night in the storage room working, enhancing Ghost's audio from the overpass, pulling clear stills of Davis and Cato, compiling a package of documentation concise enough to speak for itself to someone who received it cold. He had synced everything to an encrypted drive and to a cloud address, setting a timed release for midnight Friday that would send the package to 3 local TV stations, 2 investigative journalists whose work he had researched and respected, and the FBI field office email address he had found on their public website. If he said it and didn't cancel it, the world would know about Officer Davis by Saturday morning regardless of what happened to Leo. Motivation, he thought. That's what you call that. He had also, and this was the part that made his hands sweat, approached Bear about the planted cache. Bear had listened. Then he had said, in his careful way, "I can't send my men in there. Any one of us anywhere near that evidence before the frame is documented. And it plays exactly the way Davis wants it to play." He had looked at Leo for a long moment. "It has to be someone they're not watching." "I know," Leo said. Bear's eyes went very still. "I need the drones," Leo said. "And about 2 hours before the ride starts." Another long silence. "You run into trouble," Bear said. "You get out. You don't play hero. You get out and you call." He put his phone number, handwritten on a piece of torn paper, because Bear did not do digital, in Leo's hand. "Am I understood?" "Yes." "Leo." Bear's voice dropped a register, which Leo hadn't thought possible. "Am I understood?" "Yes, sir." Bear nodded once. And that was the closest thing to a blessing Leo was going to get. The charity ride departed at 9:30. Leo left the clubhouse at 7:15, backpack loaded, Ghost charged and ready. The two larger drones, he called them Atlas and Anchor, tucked in their cases with fresh batteries and the electronic jammer module wrapped in a cloth at the bottom of the bag. Caldwell Avenue at 7:30 was quiet, the way industrial streets are quiet. Not peaceful, just dormant. The old garage sat dark and hollow-windowed, its parking lot weeded over. The storm drain on the south side was a standard city grate, unremarkable, set flush with the sidewalk beside a stretch of cracked curb. Leo did not approach it directly. He found a position on the roof of an adjacent building, accessible via a fire escape with a broken latch, and deployed Ghost first, bringing it down in a slow hover just above the drain area, its camera tilted at the ground. At 8 meters of altitude, he could read the serial numbers on the storm grate. The cache was under the grate. He could see the edge of a wrapped parcel visible at the lip of the storm drain, placed there in a hurry, or placed by someone confident it wouldn't be found before tonight. Either way, it was there, and it was real, and if the tactical team went in after 10 with their instructions to find exactly what Davis had told them they would find it. Leo thought for 30 seconds. Then he pulled out Atlas. Atlas was his largest drone, a modified commercial quad with a payload arm he had fitted himself, designed originally to carry small instruments for aerial measurement projects. The arm had a grip rated for about 800 grams. More importantly, it had enough thrust-to-weight ratio to carry something small and awkward through the air for approximately 200 meters before the battery started to protest. He attached a length of light cable to Atlas's payload arm, at the end of which he had rigged a small magnetic hook, scavenged from a hardware kit, strong enough to hold about a kilogram. He sent Atlas down from the rooftop in a long, slow arc, positioning it above the storm drain grate. This part was pure drone pilot skill. He had spent 4 years on this. He didn't rush it. The hook latched onto the grate handle on the second attempt. Atlas strained against the weight. The grate was probably 12 kilograms, and Leo pushed the throttle as far as it would go, the rotors screaming with effort, the drone vibrating. For one long second, nothing moved. Then the grate shifted, tilted, and lifted clear of the drain with a grinding scrape that sounded terrifyingly loud in the empty street. Leo kept it clear while he deployed Anchor, the second mid-sized drone, which he had rigged with a simple grabber, 2 foam-padded prongs controlled by the same modified servo he used for aerial photography. He brought Anchor down into the open storm drain, the camera feed on his tablet showing the contents clearly. 2 packages wrapped in black plastic, taped neatly, and 4 handguns in individual Ziploc sleeves. It took 6 trips, 3 minutes and 40 seconds of flying that required more concentration than anything he had ever done in his life. Each package came up in Anchor's grabber, was carried across the lot, and deposited inside the abandoned garage through a broken window, placed where they would be found if someone searched the garage, but nowhere near the storm drain, nowhere near the route, nowhere near the Iron Road MC's path. His hands were shaking badly by the time he brought Atlas back and settled the grate into place. But the cache was clear. He had barely stowed the drones when his phone buzzed. Not Bear's handwritten number, a number he didn't recognize. He answered on instinct. "Smart kid," said a voice. Low, conversational, almost gentle. "Marcus Reyes." Leo's stomach dropped through the rooftop. "I've been watching your building for 3 days," Marcus continued. "Not you specifically, the building you've been sleeping in. I put a man on it as a precaution. He just called me and told me a boy with a backpack left the Iron Road Clubhouse 2 hours ago heading east." A pause. "You're at the Caldwell site, aren't you?" Leo said nothing. "You've moved my property," Marcus said. It was still conversational. "I can respect the intelligence. I really can. But you understand this changes nothing. Davis's teams go in tonight on the route regardless. And by the time your bikers figure out what's happening, I know about the timed release," Leo said. A silence. "The video package. Audio, visuals, full documentation. Davis and your Lieutenant Cato, under the overpass, yesterday afternoon." Leo kept his voice even. He was amazed at how even it came out. "It goes to the FBI field office and several journalists at midnight tonight. I built it so I couldn't accidentally cancel it." This was a lie. He could absolutely cancel it. But Marcus didn't need to know that. Another silence. Longer. "You're bluffing," Marcus said. "I'm 16 years old, and I just used drones to clean out your evidence cache from a storm drain." Leo kept his voice steady. Does that sound like something a bluffer would do? He heard something then that he had never expected to hear from Marcus Reyes. A long, slow exhale. "Where are you right now?" Marcus said. "Somewhere you won't find me in time," Leo said, and hung up. He started moving. He needed Davis caught in the act, or as close to it as possible, because the documentation package was significant, but a live recording of a uniformed officer coordinating a frame-up was definitive. He needed Davis to show his hand tonight. He pulled up the drone controls and sent Ghost northeast, toward the road junction on Harbor where, according to the plan he had overheard, Davis would be positioning himself before the ride passed through. He found him 20 minutes later, Davis in his personal car, engine running, parked in a lot off Harbor with a clear view of the route, radio in hand, waiting. Leo brought Ghost down from 60 feet, slowly, at an angle that kept it out of the driver's side sight line, until the drone was hovering at window level on the passenger side, camera trained directly through the glass, microphone at close range. He checked the recording. Running. He moved to a position on the corner of Harbor and Mills, 50 meters from Davis's car, pressed into the shadow of a bus shelter. From here he could see the car, see the route, and hear, far in the distance, the unmistakable approach of what was coming. The Iron Road MC. He heard them before he saw them. A building thunder of engines. The kind of sound that started somewhere between your shoulder blades and traveled down your spine, multiplied across 20 machines turning in loose formation onto Harbor Avenue. Leo had heard those engines dozens of times from inside the clubhouse, idling in the lot, rumbling to life for short runs. He had never heard all of them together, moving at full pace. It was extraordinary. It was the sound of something elemental and certain, and Leo felt something in his chest tighten unexpectedly. Bear was at the front. Even at this distance, in the low evening light, there was no mistaking him. Upright on his machine, silver beard, the president's patch catching the streetlight, riding with the unshakable calm of a man who had been doing this for 3 decades and had never once doubted his right to the road beneath his wheels. Davis picked up his radio. All units, be advised, subject group is eastbound on Harbor. Initiate in 7, Leo took out the jammer. The jammer was a handheld unit about the size of a TV remote, which had started its life as a component in a signal testing kit and been modified over 8 months into something that could disrupt radio communication on emergency service frequencies within a 30-meter radius. It was, Leo was reasonably certain, illegal to operate under normal circumstances. He was operating it under abnormal circumstances and was prepared to argue the distinction if required. He activated it. Davis's radio cut to static. Davis frowned at the handset, shook it, tried again. Static. He picked up his phone instead, and Leo was already moving, walking rapidly toward the car, Ghost hovering just ahead of him, recording. He came around to Davis's window at the same moment Davis noticed the drone. The officer looked up from his phone, and Leo watched his face process several things in quick succession. The drone, the phone pointed at him, the recording indicator, and the inescapable fact that he was sitting in his personal vehicle on a Friday evening with a tactical team standing by to execute a pre-planned operation against the men currently riding down Harbor Avenue. Officer Davis, Leo said, projecting his voice clearly enough for the drone microphone to capture it. I need you to understand that this is being recorded, that a package of evidence including audio and visual documentation of your meeting with Marcus Reyes's associate yesterday afternoon has already been sent to the FBI field office. Get away from this vehicle, and that everything you say in the next 30 seconds is going to determine whether this ends with you in handcuffs or with something considerably worse. Leo held the phone steady. His heart was performing alarming acrobatics inside his chest, but his hand was not shaking. Stand down your teams. Right now. Or this recording goes public in the next 5 minutes. Davis stared at him. For one long second, Leo genuinely didn't know which way it was going to go. Then he heard, from behind him, growing rapidly louder, the thunder of engines slowing, the deep mechanical exhale of 20 motorcycles dropping their speed in concert. He didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on Davis. But Davis was looking past Leo now, at something over his shoulder, and whatever he saw there was doing considerably more persuasive work than Leo had managed. You want to have this conversation, said a voice directly behind Leo, a bass rumble that shook the very air. Or you want to have it with me? Leo exhaled. Bear had found him. Later, Bear would tell Leo that he had turned the ride around the moment he got Jax's signal, because Jax had gone back to check on the kid before the ride departed, found the storage room empty, and put the picture together faster than anyone had any right to. Later, Davis would tell his lawyer that he had been set up, that the evidence was circumstantial, that his presence on Harbor Avenue that evening was coincidence, all of which collapsed within 48 hours under the weight of Ghost's footage. the original overpass recording, and the statements of 3 members of his tactical team who, when presented with the FBI's evidence and the offer of a deal, turned out to have very clear memories of being asked to do something that had seemed wrong at the time. But that was later. Right now, in the parking lot off Harbor Avenue, Bear was out of the saddle and moving across the lot with the unhurried certainty of a force of nature, while 20 Iron Road motorcycles idled in the street behind him, their engines a low collective growl that vibrated in the chest cavity. And Officer Davis was looking at the man approaching his vehicle with the expression of someone who had just realized, with perfect clarity, that he had miscalculated the situation in every possible direction. "Son," Bear said, and it took Leo a moment to understand that Bear was talking to him. And there was something in the word itself, in the simple directness of it, that hit Leo somewhere entirely unexpected. "Are you all right?" "I'm all right," Leo said. "Any injuries?" "No, sir." Bear nodded once. Then he looked at Davis. He looked at Davis for a very long time without speaking, and Leo watched Davis's jaw work as the officer tried to find something to say and couldn't locate anything that wasn't either a confession or an obvious lie. "You're set up on the Caldwell cache," Bear said finally. "My prospect already dealt with that. You let that land. Your radio teams are standing by on a frequency they currently can't access. You let that land too. And whatever is on that recording," he nodded toward Ghost, still hovering patiently at window level, "has already been sent to people who are going to ask you some very hard questions." Davis's hand moved toward the door handle. "I wouldn't," Jack said quietly from the other side of the car, where he had materialized with the silent efficiency that he brought to everything. Davis did not open the door. "Call your teams," Bear said. "Stand them down. Do it on your phone, since the radio isn't working. And then you're going to stay right there while we figure out the right people to hand you to." He paused. "The FBI has already received documentation regarding Marcus Reyes and your association with him. If you cooperate from this point forward, that is useful to them. If you don't," Bear shrugged, an enormous, mountain-shifting gesture, "your career and your freedom were over the moment you had that conversation under the overpass. What happens next is entirely up to you." Davis looked at the phone in his hand. He dialed. "Stand down," he said, his voice flat and broken, all the careful neutrality scraped away. "Stand down all units. The operation is canceled." Bear stood in place until he heard confirmation through Davis's phone. Then he turned and walked back to Leo, and he looked at him, at the backpack with the drones half sticking out, the jammer still in his hand, the general state of a boy who hadn't slept properly in a week and had just done something that could have gone profoundly wrong in a dozen different ways. And he made a sound Leo had never heard from him before. He laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him, deep and genuine, the laugh of a man who had seen a great many things in his life and had not expected this particular one. "You moved the cache with your drones," Bear said. "Yes, sir." "And you jammed his radio." "Yes, sir." "And you recorded the whole thing while you were standing there by yourself." "Yes, sir." Bear looked at Jax over Leo's head. Some communication passed between them that Leo wasn't meant to intercept. Then Bear looked back at Leo and set one enormous hand on the boy's shoulder, briefly, firmly, and in that brief contact was something Leo had been missing for longer than the 3 weeks he had spent in this building. "Well done," Bear said. What happened over the following 72 hours was, in contrast to the evening's restraint, considerably less gentle, though still, Bear was careful to ensure, operating within a framework he could stand behind. Marcus Reyes was at his office when they arrived. Not all 20 men, just Bear, Jax, and 4 others. But in the enclosed space of Marcus's building, 6 men of the Iron Road MC occupied a different kind of weight than they did in an open street. Marcus had his security, of course, 4 men, positioned, professional. Those 4 men took one look at Bear's face and made a collective decision about their professional futures. Marcus did not have their luxury. The conversation that followed was private. Bear insisted on that, and Leo, who had been left at the clubhouse with explicit instructions to stay there, didn't witness it directly. What he knew was that when Bear returned 2 hours later, his knuckles were bruised. Marcus Reyes had called his lawyer, and the full documentation package Leo had compiled had been delivered by hand to the FBI field office by a man who had driven through the night to get there. Marcus was arrested at 10:17 the following morning. The charges were substantial: murder in the first degree, racketeering, conspiracy, and a list of supplementary counts that would keep federal prosecutors occupied for years. Davis, who had spent the night being questioned at a federal facility, had, as Bear had predicted, found cooperation considerably more attractive once the scale of the evidence became clear. The video of Tommy Chin's murder, which Leo had recorded on his phone, formed the centerpiece of the criminal case. Tommy Chin's family, who had been told by the Vipers that Tommy had simply left the city, and who had been warned in unambiguous terms that asking further questions would be unwise, learned for the first time what had actually happened to him. What came after that was not a neat or easy thing, and Leo didn't pretend otherwise. There was grief, and there would be a long road of legal process ahead. But they knew. The man responsible was in custody. The truth was on record. Leo understood, without anyone explaining it to him, that this was what justice actually looked like most of the time. Not clean or triumphant, just true. The clubhouse on the Saturday of the following weekend was the loudest Leo had ever heard it. He had been inside the building for nearly 3 weeks now, and he knew its rhythms. The quiet industrial hum of weekday mornings, the managed noise of meeting nights, the rolling thunder of departure when the whole chapter rode out together. He had thought he knew the upper range of it. He had not. Someone had hauled in 2 industrial speakers that were giving the building's walls serious structural concerns. The bar, which on a normal evening served perhaps 20 men, was currently handling something closer to 40. Members of other chapters who had heard about what happened, old friends, people who had been connected to the Iron Road for decades. The motorcycles in the lot outside were parked in a configuration that had overflowed into the adjacent block, row after row of chrome and leather under the evening sky. Leo was sitting at the bar with a Coke, watching the room, when Jax appeared beside him and sat down. They had developed something, he and Jax, over the 3 weeks that couldn't quite be called friendship. It was more like the relationship between a demanding teacher and a student who had refused to quit. There was respect in it, which was more durable than friendship anyway. "You going back to school Monday?" Jax asked. "Yeah, I think so." Leo thought about his life beyond these walls. His mother, who knew where he had been and had received the news with a mixture of terror and pragmatic relief that was very much her personality. The apartment on the east side. The AP calculus class. The ordinary life he was going to have to re-enter and continue. "I have an exam in 2 weeks. Calculus. English lit." Jax considered this. "You need help with that?" Leo looked at him. "Shepard's better at it than I am," Jax said, with a slight defensive quality to his voice. "But I've read most things." "I'll keep that in mind," Leo said. Shepard, from across the room, raised his glass in their direction as if he had somehow heard the whole exchange, which in the noise of the party he absolutely could not have, but which felt precisely accurate anyway. The room went quiet. Abruptly, the way a concert hall goes quiet between movements, not from shock, but from expectation, an audience that knows something significant is coming and wants to receive it properly. Bear was standing at the center of the room. He was wearing his full vest, every patch and pin in place, and he was holding something folded in his hands. He looked across the room until he found Leo at the bar, and the room parted between them in an unspoken choreography, opening a clear path. Leo got off the bar stool. He walked across the floor toward Bear, and the room that closed quietly behind him felt like something. Like the closing of a parenthesis, like the settling of a thing that had been open and uncertain and was now being made permanent. Bear looked at him in that steady, ocean-deep way, and then he opened what he was holding. It was a jacket, black leather, broken into the perfect suppleness that only came with years, carrying the particular smell of the Iron Road, engine oil, and open highway, and the accumulated history of men who had lived by their own code. On the back, a patch had been sewn with the kind of care a man only brought to something he meant to last. A custom design, clean and precise, incorporating the Iron Road's emblem worked into something new. On the front, over the left breast, where a member's road name would go, just 2 words, stitched in white thread with a craftsman's precision. Honorary member. The room was completely silent. Leo looked at the jacket, looked at Bear's face. "You're not a biker," Bear said quietly. It was not an apology and not a diminishment. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same directness Bear brought to everything. The honesty of a man who respected the person he was speaking to too much to dress things up. "And I'm not going to tell you that you are something you're not. What you are is someone who stood his ground when he had every reason to run. Twice. Who used what he had instead of wishing he had something else." He paused. "Who protected this chapter when he didn't owe it a single thing." Leo said nothing. "The prospect role ends tonight," Bear said. "You've got school on Monday and a life to build, and a mother who needs her kid to come home." He held out the jacket. But you will always have a home here. These men, a slight tilt of his head, encompassing the room, the whole assembled weight of it, are your people. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. That doesn't expire. Leo took the jacket. It was heavier than he had expected, the weight of real leather, real time, real significance. He slid it on, and it was too big in the shoulders and too long in the sleeves. The way something built to last is too big at first, leaving room for what's coming. It was the most precisely right thing he had ever worn. The room erupted, not in polished, orchestrated celebration, in the particular way of the Iron Road MC, which was to say with overwhelming and immediate sincerity, the crash of hands on the bar and the table, voices rising in a roar, someone firing the engines outside just because the moment demanded it, the sound layering in through the walls and joining the noise inside until the whole building was vibrating with it. One great collective expression of something that had no cleaner name than family. Tiny lifted Leo completely off the ground in a hug that rearranged several of his internal organs and set him back down with a grin that split his enormous face in half. Ramos shook his hand with both of his, very seriously, the way soldiers marked the moments that mattered. Shepard said, "Well done," quietly and precisely, which from him was equivalent to a standing ovation. Jack stood back from the initial rush and watched the room for a moment. Then, when the first wave had settled, he stepped forward and extended his hand. Leo shook it. "Don't slouch in that jacket," Jack said. Leo straightened his spine. Later, when the party had aged into the comfortable warmth of good company and the speakers had been turned down to a level that permitted actual conversation, Leo found himself outside, sitting on the step of the side door, with the jacket over his shoulders and Ghost in his lap, running a quiet diagnostics check on the motor housings. The evening was cool and the city spread out westward from the lot, lights and distance, the particular beautiful indifference of a place that has no idea what happened in its midst this week. Bear came and sat on the step beside him. For a while neither of them said anything, which was fine, because Bear had a gift for silence that made it feel inhabited rather than empty. "Tommy Chin's family," Leo said eventually. "You think the case is solid?" "The FBI has everything they need. It's as solid as it gets." Leo nodded, ran his thumb along Ghost's casing. "You all right?" Bear asked. Leo thought about this honestly, the way he tried to think about everything. He thought about the alley on Caldwell, the sound that had ended Tommy Chin's life in a fraction of a second, the way it had hung in the air afterward like a stone dropped into still water, the circles of it still expanding. He thought about the week that followed, the fear, the unfamiliar rooms, the mornings on cold concrete learning to fall without breaking, the strange and unexpected grace of being claimed by a family that had no obligation to claim him and had done it anyway. "I think so," Leo said. "I think I will be." Bear nodded. He was looking west at the city lights. "You know what a prospect actually is?" Bear said. "Not the duties, not the rank, the idea behind the word." Leo waited. "It means someone being considered," Bear said. "Watched, not with suspicion, but with attention. Someone who might become something. The word comes from the Latin. Prospectus. What lies ahead? What can be seen from where you're standing?" He was quiet for a moment. Every good man is a prospect for something. Leo looked at the city. What lies ahead? He was 16 years old. He was wearing a leather jacket with his name in it, sitting on the step of a building where 30 men inside were laughing and loud and alive. Men who had decided, without being asked, that he was theirs to protect, and that whatever came for him would have to come through them first. Somewhere across town, Tommy Chin's children were going to sleep in a house where justice was moving, however slowly, in their direction. And he had 3 drones, and a science fair project, and 2 more years of high school, and a life that was as wide and unwritten as a horizon. "I should go home," Leo said. "My mom's been patient." "You should," Bear agreed. Leo stood. He tucked Ghost carefully into his bag, zipped it, shouldered it. He looked down at Bear, who, for once, was the one sitting while Leo stood, and the reversal of it felt significant, like something being handed from one set of hands to another. "Thank you," Leo said. "For the door. For all of it." Bear looked up at him. The street light caught the silver of his beard, the deep lines of his face, the density of a life written in ink and scar tissue in time. A man who had seen enough of the world to know exactly what he was looking at when a 16-year-old kid came through his door in the dark, clutching evidence of something wrong and refusing, despite everything, to let it go. "The door was yours to come through," Bear said simply. "We just didn't lock it." Leo pulled the jacket tighter against the cool night air and walked out of the lot onto Bridger Street, his sneakers quiet on the pavement, the city opening up ahead of him with all its distance and possibility. And behind him, steady as the earth, steady as 30 years of keeping faith with the people who mattered, the Iron Road MCs settled back into their night. Engines ticking cool in the lot, voices and laughter warm through the walls, the lights of the clubhouse burning in the dark like something that had decided a long time ago that it was not going anywhere.